Welcome to the Do Good on Purpose podcast, where you can listen to leaders discuss solutions to the most pressing challenges in our world, and where you can also support them by donating through the show's giving circle. I'm your host, Dorothy Stuehmke. Tennis, the game of tennis. But is it really just a game? One of the things that interests me the most in the impact world is how sports can be used as a tool for opportunity and long-term success, especially for young people. Because sometimes a sport can become so much more than just a game. It becomes a place to belong, a safe space after school, a source of confidence, discipline, mentorship, and community. And for many young people, that kind of environment can shape the direction of an entire life. As someone from a tennis family myself, my husband and I met through tennis, and now our son is a competitive junior tennis player. I've seen firsthand how powerful those spaces can be and the role that tennis can play in creating opportunity and possibility. That's why I was so looking forward to this conversation with John Borden. John is the CEO of Tennis Memphis, an organization using tennis as a vehicle to support young people, strengthen communities, and create pathways far beyond the court. In this conversation, we talk about what sports like tennis can represent in a community and how creating spaces where young people can feel seen, supported, and challenged can unlock potential in extraordinary ways. John Borden joins us now. John, I'm so excited to have some time with you today on the Do Good on Purpose podcast. Thank you so much for joining me. I've known you for several years now in the context of tennis and youth development, and I'm just really excited for people to get to hear from you about what you're building in Memphis. So thanks for being with me.
I mean, this is awesome. It was pleasant after all of these years to hear from you again and to reconnect. And the good news, especially when it comes to you and I in tennis, it makes it for us when we, reconnect, that it's very easy and really, really fun to reconnect. So I'm excited to be doing this.
Great. And just for context for the audience, both John and I are tennis enthusiasts. We've grown up with the sport. And I don't know about your kids, if your kids are playing tennis right now. They're a bit younger than my son, but my son is a competitive junior player. So we're knee deep in tennis and in our household.
My kids, they appreciate tennis. They've been around it their whole life. My daughter's a competitive gymnast. My son's sport, if he has one, it's soccer, although like a lot of kids, his competitive instincts are rather stoked by gaming. So we have some rules around the house. You can only do but so much virtual gaming before you have to actually go out and play games. I think even as we kind of talk about some of the discussion points that we have for later on, can't force them. Like you can expose him, but I think one of the better lessons that I learned as an athlete and as a coach was you have to be able to do it on your own. Like the desire and the motivation at some point has to come from inside. It can't be external. So it's the approach we take with both of our kids.
Sure. And I absolutely appreciate that. And I think a lot of parents appreciate that mindset. And there's, no matter what sport or what you're into, I think there's so many transferable skill sets. And I think we're going to get into that a little bit more as well.
Yeah, for sure.
So to ground the conversation, I want to start with an understanding of what sports means in community, because essentially that's what you're doing. You're building a culture of community and sports in Memphis. That's what you were brought over to do. And I want our listeners to gain an understanding of what sports actually means in that context beyond just it being a game. So maybe you can start with that.
I mean, sports are inherently communal. Like you don't get better as an athlete without community. You don't enjoy a sport without community. There isn't a sport that I can think of that doesn't involve other people. Even if you're a golfer and you're playing against the course maybe, but, you don't get better as a golfer on your own. Like you need guidance, you need support, you need a community, right? You need a golf course. You need people that work the golf course because you need it to be open to go train. So sports are inherently communal. Some have larger communities than others, but sports, generally speaking, are communal. So from an organizational perspective, it really is tapping into what's already there. And like, how can we take this small community of sports and apply it to things outside of the sporting community and or vice versa?
Yeah, that's a great explanation. And so you work in particular with under-resourced communities and bringing those communities to tennis and tennis to those communities. So in neighborhoods where resources may be a bit more limited, how can structured sports programs really change a young person's trajectory?
I think the first thing to consider as an organization is, what is your role in that, right? Like, is your role to just introduce and expose? Some models are to just keep people safe, from the neighborhood for a couple of hours a day. Our general posture here and my general perspective is that the excellence exists in the communities. You just need to align your resources with the excellence, and you need to do your homework to figure out where the gaps are. Like, just because we have tennis rackets doesn't mean that that's the resource that everyone needs, and it's not just, you were just talking about community. It's not just what the athlete may need, like parents may need time, right? They may need, an extra set of eyes on their children. Like, the resources are layered. So as a youth sports-based organization, and really as a community organization, it's really being aware of what the community's needs are. So then you can accurately apply the resources that you need to where the community has gaps or where the individual has gaps.
That's a really great explanation. Thanks for sharing that. So in the context of tennis, let's kind of dive into tennis now. What makes tennis unique in the space of sports and youth development?
Tennis is unique in that, while again, there's a community of support around you, when you're competing outside of doubles, it's all on you. So the things that we have to teach in addition to the skills require self-sufficiency. By and large, you don't have timeouts. You're not going to your coach and asking for assistance. After play, they're not yelling at you from the sidelines. All the work that you have to do to prepare happens before competition. And that's both physically, that's technically, but that's also mentally. And again, tennis isn't the only individual sport. I mean, you have racing sports like track and field, swimming, and then you've got some individual sports, perhaps like gymnastics. But I think the same would apply to those. I mean, that's not a lot, certainly compared to more popular team sports. But even when you compare them to like gymnastics or swimming or track and field, unless it's a longer distance run, it's all on you, for hours at a time for an entire tournament. Like, it's all on you. Like, you're the person that has to make the adjustments. You're the person that has to be the coach. You have to be the tactician, right? Like, you have to be your therapist. Like, all of these things exist on the court. So from a teaching perspective, tennis is unique in that you have to really be conscientious about building an entire person. And then just as a player, you have to learn how to manage everything, because it's also stressful. Like, even in a team sport, pressure is pressure. The difference is that some of that pressure gets diffused among your teammates. In tennis, outside of doubles, it's just you.
Yeah, that's so well said. And I see these themes all the time with my son. I mean, the self-reliance, the ability to have to pump yourself up when the spotlight is on you and you're in this hole. How are you going to dig yourself out? And how are you going to keep your cool? How are you going to stay composed? When everything is against you, when nothing is going your way, when you can't find your rhythm. And that translates so much to life, I feel like. And so you talked a bit about how when you design your programs, when you're working with kids, you're figuring out the kinds of resources and what to lean into. And it's a very layered approach. So talk to me a little bit more about what that looks like.
We have a little bit of work to do in Tennis Memphis. Part of it's just because I'm new here, but at previous stops, as our programming got more mature, the approach was we got really comfortable with the longitudinal approach to development and developing athletes, right? So if we were to just use 18 years old as a reference point or 19 years old as a reference point, what are all the things that an athlete needs to be equipped with, mind, body, and spirit, so to speak. And then you start weaving those things in on an appropriate scaled basis as early as, someone picking up a racket. So you might remember from my days at WTF, one of the things that was really an important part was socio and emotional learning as a comparison, or as a supplement rather, to early childhood education, All right. Like that's one of the things that tennis can do in a way that's fun. Like you can gamify these core skills. Well, that is a part of developing a program, developing a pathway. Like that at some point your athlete's going to need to be resilient. They're going to need to be patient. They're going to need to know how to work with others. Like all of these are relevant skills that you need to have for success. And we get to teach them through tennis at a really early age and then develop them over time. Like your problem solving skills at 4 are a lot different than your problem solving skills at 10, primarily because the situation is different and you're a little bit more mature. But the core of what you learn at 4 years old should be able to carry you to 10, to 14, to 18, and so on and so on and so on. So when you think about developing a program, you start with, I think, identifying the things that are going to be the most essential by the time that a child leaves your programming. So if you were to narrow that down to tennis, the technical aspects are the easiest. And like if you take care of that young, obviously you have to modify as your athlete grows. But the most important thing is, what have you given them mentally? How do they view themselves? What kind of socio-emotional skills have they developed over time? So I think, anyone, you can almost kind of by accident make someone technically sound because that's just a matter of repetition. But, to make someone truly ready to be a competitor, because it draws a lot of you, that's a different enterprise. So it really is weaving in those multitude of things all at once.
Yeah, that's a great explanation. And it reminds me a lot of, having grown up in New York City, Arthur Ashe played a big role in bringing tennis to youth across New York City. Althea Gibson was another one who played a big role in bringing the sport to youth across the country. So what you've just described to me is really leveraging sport, the sport of tennis, as a bridge to helping develop an entire person from the ground up, physically, mentally, spiritually, even, So I think that's amazing. And I think this is so incredible what you've been brought to do in Memphis, especially because when I think of Memphis, I think of music, right? But when we connected recently, you gave me a little bit of the history on tennis in Memphis. There is, in fact, a thriving tennis culture there. Tell us a little bit about that and what you're seeing in the youth in Memphis when it comes to tennis.
So first off, I should say that this is a really cool day to be on this podcast because we just had a press conference announcing to the world that we're actually bringing professional tennis back to Memphis.
It's incredible. Congratulations.
Thank you. When we talked, the news was still under embargo, but as of about 2 hours and 50 minutes ago, it's now news to the world. It's the Memphis Classic. It's happening this July. But Memphis has one of the most unique tennis communities that I think I've ever seen. We, Tennis Memphis, are a nonprofit management company, and we've been in existence for 25 years, and we have the good fortune to be able to manage a large portion of the public facilities that were built by the city of Memphis, which includes 4 indoor facilities, one of which is in my background now, it's the Leftwich Tennis Center, which was recently reconstructed, opened in 2023. It's got 24 outdoor courts, 12 indoor courts, state of the art. And then we have 3 other indoor facilities, the Bellevue Tennis Center, Eldon Rourke Tennis Center, and the Waldrick Tennis Center. And then we have our outdoor facilities, Raleigh, Wooddale, and Fraser. And the model, if I were to oversimplify it, is that we have community hubs all over the city. You talked about Arthur Ashe in particular and his connection to the National Junior Tennis League, which we also work closely with through the USTA Foundation, who actually just launched a new and evolved version of the goal of what the National Junior Tennis League did and does, which is to be a community pillar. For a long time, it was primarily focused on the individual athlete, but under new CEO's leadership, Jenny has made a commitment that and understands that tennis isn't just about one person. Like obviously, you just talked about your son. I bet you would love it if he took all the responsibility for everything. Like he made his lunch, he made sure his rackets got strung, he got to tournaments, he got to competition, and he was fully self-sufficient. Obviously, That's not how it works. And between you and your husband, at a bare minimum, you're that community. And then beyond that, as we talked about earlier, he can't hit by himself. If I recall correctly, your husband is an extraordinarily gifted tennis player, but as I can personally attest to, mentally, I'm as sharp as I've ever been, but physically, it's a completely different story. So if your husband is, and you are in that same boat, which I don't want to make any assumptions, but let's just say that you need a community outside of the two of you to do it. So, that's what the USTA Foundation, the National Junior Tennis League, and Tennis Memphis have in common. It really is this community-centric approach, and all of the communities that we serve are different, like, which is also beautiful, right? Like Memphis isn't monolithic. The tennis infrastructure here is 50 to 60 years old in terms of these facilities and constantly evolving. Prior to the new tournament today, the Memphis Classic, for years, Memphis hosted the Memphis Open, which was a combined event at the end. It was a 500 level event. It was in February, and tennis is a big deal here. And it was. So, it's not intuitive to think about it, but all the conditions are here as well. I mean, it's been in the 70s for the last couple of days, and that's not really going to change. And it's early March. So, you can train a lot and year round. You can play outdoors rather. For so many different reasons, Memphis is just an incredible tennis playing community. And not just in the city. I mean, even in the suburbs. I mean, it's a big deal here. I mean, at times it feels like Memphis is just on its own self-sustaining island here in the Mid-South. And that's no shade to our neighbors in Arkansas or Mississippi or Alabama, Kentucky, anyone that neighbors us. But Memphis definitely punches above its weight in so many ways, and tennis is one of them.
So this is like the perfect role for you to come in and build this and draw upon all the experience that you've had running big tennis programs in cities. But there's a story behind that too, right? There's someone by the name of John Borden who was once 9 years old and picked up a tennis racket for the first time. Tell me about that experience when you were 9 years old and you picked up that racket and what it did for you.
It's interesting. I think I picked up a racket because my cousin Tanya was an otherworldly tennis player. And generally speaking, I thought she was the coolest human being I'd ever met.
Because she played tennis or just in general?
Just her aura, her swag. Just generally speaking, it's just like, okay. And I want her to think I'm cool. She plays tennis. She's great at tennis. I'm going to give this a try. She was introduced by my aunt, who was introduced by my grandmother. So there's just a chain of extraordinary women that kind of led to Tanya playing. And then I was like, well, I want to give this a try. And then I just loved it. As a matter of fact, the program that she was raised in is the program that I joined. And, summer camp was open to just about anyone. But in order to train year round, you had to be accepted into the program. And the first year, I didn't make it. And I can't really remember all the details between the end of that first summer and the next summer, but I was determined that I was going to make it. And, I did. And tennis just had me from there, and people talk a lot about tennis it has this bad reputation in that, you are only training all the time. You don't have friends, you're prone to burnout, but you just socialize a little bit different. Like some of my best friends to this day, like one of my best friends, Michael Harper, he was in my wedding. Like we've been friends for over 30 years, like best friends for over 30 years. Another one of my friends, James Logan, we've been best friends for almost 30 years. Like this is a part of my tennis community. This was a part of Philadelphia, not to mention just the scores of relationships that I have from tennis. So it's interesting, like the sport got me, and I recently was interviewed for an article by the USTA, and I talked about how it was an anchor, like almost immediately. And it's kind of just like one of my favorite movies is Brown Sugar. And shout out to Taye Diggs and Sanaa Lathan. But that movie was about hip hop. It's like the first time you heard that first break beat, it's just like, yep, it got me. It's like the first time I heard that tennis ball. Can't say exactly what it is, but like it had me. And it has me. So, and I still feel it today, even when I go out and play tennis. Like it just still kind of gives me the same joy and the same satisfaction, even though my competition days are long behind me. But, it's like there's a freedom to it. you know?
That's so beautifully said. It opened so many doors for you, it sounds like, not only in terms of like friendships and community, but also education too, right? You played college level tennis.
Hmm.
And it led to this incredible career where you're leading these unbelievable tennis centers around the country. So congratulations. And I can see why you're so passionate about it, because it's just manifested in so many ways in your life. I think that's so important for people to see that maybe it's not that it gives you the career to become a professional tennis player, but there are so many things you can take from the training and from, the community building and the friendships that can open doors for you. And you really kind of exemplify that. So when you're engaging with youth in your programs, and one of the things we also recently talked about was that you're on the courts more with the kids now, and you're able to hit more with them and, coach them, mentor them. Tell me what that feels like to be out there and to be connected to the programs and the kids that you're involved with.
It's funny. I wouldn't necessarily say that what I'm doing is coaching,
Mm-hmm.
because, if I was like coaching, I mean, that's a big time investment.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that in this role, if I want to be successful and I want the organization to be successful, I have to put boundaries around myself so I just don't throw myself onto the tennis court.
Mm-hmm.
But with that said, one of my favorite things to do is just, pull up to our different centers. And I mean, I can't help myself, like if there's a pattern, I'm going to talk to the coach, I'm going to talk to the player, and our teams are great because even if I'm dressed like I am today, like it doesn't make a difference. I mean, you can't see it now, but I have on my dress pants, but I have on Kobe's too, so I'm ready. I'm ready to go on the court, or at least walk around on it. But the thing that is so satisfying about coaching and or just generally from my position, spending time with athletes is development. Like you said earlier, like I wasn't a professional tennis player. After a while, I didn't have a desire to be one. But the skills that I learned, I can't think for me personally of a better place to learn than tennis. So when I'm able to go on the court, even if it's just walking around, talking with our kids, interacting with our coaches, and you get to see and know in real time that that same process is happening with your students, like it doesn't really get much better than that. And then for me, like I'm responsible for hundreds of thousands of kids around the city, so to know that I can create an environment where that focused learning and development can happen, it doesn't get much better than that. And then if it could, it's going on court and seeing it in real time. Not just, looking at, the data and the reports that I get from my teams and from our centers. Like being able to go to Eldon Rourke or to Bellevue and kind of breathe in the air and just watch our athletes, get a little bit better every day. Like that is what is, I don't know if I could do a job where I would have greater enjoyment. I mean, again, it's rare to be able to just see like, this is structure that we're building here. And then to see it translate into our athletes in real time. I mean, it's overwhelming. Like it's a privilege.
Thank you for that. I can feel the passion through the podcast. So let's talk a little bit about the programs and the way that they're set up and how they're structured so people understand what you actually do and what these programs actually do for these youth. So they come after school? Do they come on the weekends? Like how is it structured and what are they actually taking part in?
I mean, we're pretty big. Right now, we've got the opportunity for students that are homeschooled to train here during the day. We've got after school programs every day of the week spread throughout the city. We do offer programming on the weekends. And then it's a developmental pathway. So we've got young girls and boys that are picking up rackets for the first time. And we have juniors that are traveling the country, in some cases traveling the world to compete. So it really is the complete ecosystem. And not to mention, the University of Memphis is housed out of Leftwich, which is where I'm sitting right now, in addition to being a resource for some of the other colleges and universities around town. So even though they're not necessarily a part of our programming, all of that kind of happens on a day-by-day basis in this beautiful symphony of tennis. And then on top of that, the other programming that we have, at least for youth, is our tennis and tutoring program, which is an after school, both educational and athletic program. Right now, it is at our Eldon Rourke location, but we're through the partnership with the USDA Foundation Community Impact Hub, we're expanding that in the upcoming months to a few other of our centers and sites around town. So, it's, there isn't, as I talked about earlier, finding the resource gaps in your community. And then, I had a friend who was also my pastor. And when I was a young adult minister years ago, his advice to me and to my peers was do it small, do it well. And, that's kind of what we've been doing for a while. And we've got a lot of growing to do. We have some pretty significant growth plates, but I think the answer to your question is that we are just a little bit of everything. We also offer this year, we're going to be somewhere in the range between $180,000 and $200,000 in scholarships for students that can't afford programming, whether that's in its totality or whether it's because they just, they can't afford a portion of it. So again, we try to make it so that anyone that desires to play and desires to pursue excellence on and off the court, there really aren't a whole lot of barriers.
That's a great summary. And can you unpack a little bit more for our audience just the cost of tennis? I mean, I think maybe it's a New York thing, but it's incredibly expensive in New York. The court time, you have to add in the travel time to tournaments on the weekends. If your child wants to compete on a level in junior tennis like my son, you have to pay for tournament entry fees. You've got to pay for equipment. My son goes through tennis sneakers every single month. Every single month he needs a new pair because of how much he's training and how much he's running around. So the scholarship piece, I think, is so key. Talk a little bit about that.
Tennis is expensive, not just because of the equipment, but because of the intensity. So you talked about the cost of sneakers, but I'm pretty sure he goes through rackets too. Breaks his strings, maybe once or twice a week. And that's, well, you're in New York, so maybe that's like $100 for a couple of rackets.
We string the rackets ourselves.
Well, there you go. But even the strings themselves, the cost of the strings, like if it's $20 to $30 for just a pack of strings, it's a couple of $100 for a reel of strings. And then a child like yours, they need to train a lot. You don't train, you kind of lose it. So if you're talking about 10 hours a week of training, especially at New York prices, I mean, it gets up there. And that's just group training. That doesn't include working with a coach privately, even if that's once a week. So you could spend, $1,000 a week, depending on the season that you're in, just on training, right? And that's before you get to traveling. That's before you get to tournaments. That's before you get to meals. So it starts to add up quickly. So we actually have been working on internally redesigning some of our programming to account for that. We actually had one of our senior directors travel with athletes, four of them this weekend, to a tournament in South Carolina. And in addition to his time, they have to travel there. They got hotels for 3 nights for 4 athletes. You got to rent a car if something happens at the tournament and it needs to go an extra day. So there's so many different costs that go into it. But for us, the main areas that we focus on is we want to offset the cost of stringing. We want to make sure that we have coaches available to travel. We also look for value adds that are going to help ease some of the shock of what you have to pay in addition to scholarshiping, right? It's not just saying we're going to take money, you'll have to pay less for training. Like that's just a small part of the equation. And if we're really about the business of promoting excellence, regardless of what the outcome might be, these are the things that need to be in place to do it. So it's surely an expensive sport. I think one of the great things about tennis as a spectator, at least you don't have to pay. The entry fees to a tournament are expensive enough, but at least as a tennis parent, you can go there and watch without having to pay an additional admission fee, which is where a lot of youth sports
That's true.
are going.
I actually never thought about it that way, but that's absolutely true. But let's talk a little bit about the parents. Do you engage parents at all in your program?
100%. I mean, you can't do it without parents.
Yeah. Can you talk about that? Because I think that's such an important element.
I think there's a couple of things. I mean, one, you parents need to be educated on what you're doing and what you're working towards. One of the ways that we've started to educate parents is with player development plans. So if your son is coming to train at Tennis Memphis, we would want to meet with you. We'd want to get feedback on what his goals are, what his aspirations are. We take some time to do an assessment, of our own, and then we put together a player development plan so that your son would he would have an idea of what the objectives are for the next 6 months, the next 9 months, the next year. And it's based on his input, it's based on your observations, and it's based on our observations. Once we put that together, we would then sit down with you, your husband, and your son, and then we would talk through it. And then from there, we would start the process of tracking it. And in that way, everyone's on the same page, the goals are clear. And this is important because as an athlete, you don't have to think about a lot of things. You want to be able to trust that you've trained and prepared so that when it's time to compete, or even when it's time to train, you've got a clear mind. You know what you're working towards, you know what you're working on. It's not just coming in and having to go through this rigorous mental exercise every day to kind of find the diamond in practice, right? So I think educating parents is an essential part of it because they also, you need to be bought in. And you don't have to be a tennis player. You don't even have to have been an athlete. But you have to be open to learning what it's going to take to get your child from point A to point B to point C, and know that our goal isn't, we are here. We are a service provider. Our goal isn't to dictate what the outcome would be. And quite frankly, we don't want to. We want that to be, your athlete's just choice. Because as we said earlier, it has to be.
So what does success look like then? I'm sure it's different for every individual. Some people, I think, would come into this and say, I want to be the next Federer. But that doesn't mean if you don't become the next Federer, that doesn't mean that you've failed. There's so many other ways to look at success in going through a program like this. Can you talk a bit about that?
First off, if someone came in and said they wanted to be the next Federer, I'd stop the conversation right there. You need to be focused on being the first you, right? And that's an important point because there are a lot of folks that are inspired by great athletes and in many ways want to emulate them. And it's cool to pick up things that you learn from other folks' games. It's a part of it. But we don't prescribe an outcome. Like the ideal situation is that, let's just say that your son is a part of our programming and he goes through the entirety of the pathway. He gets all the resources, value add and otherwise. And when it's time for him to go to college, he's got a choice. He can go to, not to say that MIT doesn't have a tennis team, but he can go to MIT for engineering, or he can go to the University of Southern California for tennis. And he has been prepared, one, for those things to be an option, but two, he's been prepared and knows that he has the agency to choose one and neither one of them will be incorrect. Like, to me, that's an ideal outcome. And that will indicate to us that, as we talked about earlier, your son is prepared socially and emotionally. He feels like he's an empowered agent in his own success. And the good news is that will translate to success on the tennis court or in the classroom, or if we decide, not that USC is a bad academic school, right? But that inner motivation, that inner drive, it would signal to us that we did a good job cultivating that. So, that's what success, because the reality is, there are few people in the history of sport that get a chance to be a Grand Slam champion. In fact, in 2017, when Roger Federer won his 20th Grand Slam, he had won 10% of all the majors ever played. That tells you how few people are able to win. And him, Rafa, Serena, Margaret Court, all these folks, Novak, all these folks that won 20 plus Grand Slams, like they are the anomalies. But the commonality is that it is all internal motivation. So
I love
if
that.
if you want to be a great Grand Slam champion, good. You will have the skills you'll have the internal spark to be able to pursue what you need to do to be great. And at some point, you're not going to be a tennis player and that spark still needs to exist. So the good news is, the results, it'll be success after success after success. Hopefully it just doesn't stop.
That's so well said. And I couldn't agree with you more, being a parent who talks to my son all the time about tennis and how it builds great character. And it is going to make you the most resilient person you'll ever be. So I'm so glad that we had this conversation. I want to ask you to tell our audience just a little bit about if they're motivated by what they heard today, what you've shared, your journey, what you're looking to accomplish in this role in Memphis, bringing this culture of tennis to the community, building the next generation of leaders, of redefining what success means in the minds of youth. If they donate through my giving circle to your organization, what would that donation go to support?
Very broadly speaking, it's developing communities that are going to be the foundation of the next chapter of this country, of this world. And that's very broad, but I believe it to my core, right? The more that we can resource our communities, the more equipped that they are, the more educated that they are, the better that we all will be. More directly, it helps to fill those resource gaps, right? So, as we endeavor to constantly figure out what our community needs, because it's changing. I mean, here in the Mid-South, or whenever you have a crisis, it really exposes, where the gaps are. You might not think about it on a day-by-day basis, but when you have a major weather event like we had a couple of weeks ago, like it exposes, the gaps. Or even going back, when we first met, this was during COVID, I believe. It's like, the gaps are really clear and it kind of focuses your mind. So for us, it's definitely making a contribution to us both figuring out with detail what the specific gaps are on a by community basis. And at the same time, filling those gaps with resources that are propelling to excellence. So tennismemphis.org is where we are. And the Giving Circle, more importantly, is where you can find us.
Thank you so much for joining me, John. It was a pleasure to have you here with me. I hope to see you on the courts in Memphis with my son.
You have no choice. You have no option. That's a must. It's an absolute must.
Okay.
All right.
Sounds good. Take care.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to today's episode on the Do Good on Purpose podcast. And if today's conversation inspired you, please consider supporting the work through the Do Good on Purpose Giving Circle, which is linked in the show notes. And if you really enjoyed this episode, please subscribe. Share it with someone who believes in building a better world, because change rarely happens by accident. It happens when people decide to do good on purpose.